Today's guest is a former NHL center who spent 17 seasons in the NHL with the Washington Capitals, Montreal Canadiens, and Vancouver Canucks. In 1986, he won the Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens. He played over 1,000 games, over 646 points, and over 900 penalty minutes. He was assistant coach with the Vancouver Canucks, head coach of the Canadiens' national women's hockey team, a hockey broadcaster, and a president of the Abbotsford Heat of the AHL. Today, he's in the business of assisting others to become great leaders. Let's welcome today's guest, Ryan Walter. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, Adam. Great to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you. As I just spoke to you a little bit before, I grew up playing a little college baseball and ice hockey. I also became a teacher, and one of the qualities that was necessary for me to become a leader as a teacher was to inspire, to be an example. And I was always fascinated with hockey, and as I mentioned a little bit before, expanding on my spirituality, which was an enhancement I found for every aspect of my life. And as I mentioned, your specific career, you encompassed everything in your career at this point. I mean, in terms of the things that you, as a player, a coach, broadcaster, team owner, and leadership program. So maybe you could just share a little bit with the audience a little bit about, was becoming an NHL player your first dream as you entered this?
Yeah, great question, Adam. You know what's interesting is, like, I grew up in Burnaby, British Columbia, which is just a little suburb of Vancouver, British Columbia. And out in Vancouver and Burnaby, like, it just rains. There's no outdoor ice. You think all of Canada is full of ice, but so if you're going to be a hockey player in Burnaby, like, your mom and dad have to be committed. They get up early, and you get on the ice early because that's the only ice time. And what happened to me is I guess I had a dream, Adam, but I think more than anything, I just fell in love with the game of hockey. Right. I love the dressing room. I love the banter. Loved the connection with the team. I love competition. I was saying to somebody recently, if you challenge me, I'm good at that. Right. I like that. Please challenge me. So I fell in love with the game, and it just kept going. Like, I left home at 15 to play junior hockey. That sort of ended up with me getting drafted number 2 in the world to the Washington Capitals.
Yeah. And at the time, they were an expansion team coming into the NHL. I mean, around that time, I remember they played in Landover, Maryland at the time.
The old building.
I remember watching some of the games as a Ranger fan, and I remember the loud sounds from that arena itself, especially I think when the siren went off. It was a very loud, pervasive sound. It was interesting because I read an article from the Washington Post, I guess it was back in 1981, which spoke about your Christianity and your religious background and how it impacted your own personal life, but how it impacted the team itself. And I know there are other aspects of hockey that take place in terms of the qualities that are necessary to play and how people were perceived in the NHL at the time of a specific, I guess, personality or mindset. And at that point, it was brought to, I guess, to the media's attention, your background, your Christian background, and some of the players on the Washington Capitals. What was the mindset of a hockey player without spirituality or without any connection?
It's a really good question. I mean, I've been both of those. I think what happened to me is a very simple process where I was, God had me sort of ready to take a next step. I was on a quick story. I was on an airplane, and we were traveling over New York. It wasn't, I forget, I think we were sort of coming from Buffalo back to Washington, but we hit a little pocket, and the plane, takes a quick dive down. And, it wasn't a big thing. I mean, the big guys in the back of the plane were crying out the name of Jesus. And for the first time in their life, it wasn't a swear word, right? But I sort of got off the plane and I thought, okay, so what if the plane goes down? Like, am I ready? Like, I prepare for games, I prepare for seasons, I prepare for life, but am I prepared to die? And I looked over at, the guys, the opportunities on my team. There were certainly some guys that drank a lot. There's other guys that, scored a lot of goals. But there was one guy on our team, Jean Pronovo, and he was a guy that read his Bible a lot. And I didn't get that. I didn't have a background in Christianity. But when I got off that plane, I turned to Jean and said, Jean, if the plane goes down, do I go up? Like, what's the answer? And it was awesome, Adam. He said, I'm not going to tell you, kid. He said, he threw me a New Testament. He said, you read for yourself. So I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John a bunch of times, and finally was confronted not by the historical Christ that everybody says is a good guy, but by the actual Christ, which is the Son of God, the actual Savior of the universe. And when that hit, I then had to make a decision, and I made a decision to begin a relationship with Jesus. And that decision has, I've grown in Christ for the last 40 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I interview a lot of people who have certain breakthroughs or wake-up calls in their life as it relates to maybe having an accident or, getting hit with a brick as opposed to a feather, of listening to what the universe, I guess, has to say to someone in their own little
Yeah.
subconscious mind. And I guess as an athlete, being in an ego-based mindset of where, it's fight or flight from day to day, I guess the incident of yourself being in a plane and experiencing this particular incident brought you to where you were supposed to be. But there are other people who go through life, or specifically hockey players, baseball players, people in the limelight who hide from the messages that exist, that take place in life, and they don't awaken to
Yes.
the calling. Had you been around people who, through your inner wisdom or through this experience, that you were able to then guide or give insight into?
Yeah. And we had lots of people throughout our lifetime that, have asked the question of my wife, Jen, and I, why are you a Christian? And why do you have joy in your relationships? And, why? And so it's an honor to be able to just share, the Christian faith with people. It's an interesting time we live right now, right, Adam? Like, if you look at a couple potential world wars, an economy that's not great and maybe going, could easily be worse than better.
Yep.
And so it's a time, I think, where people are going to get that wake up call. We know many people who have had to remortgage their houses and can't do it. So there's God tends to get our attention. And when things are good in life, we tend to not look to God.
That's right. Yeah, people shift. Uh, is it related to your NHL career as the onset of developing or having the capacity to be a leader? You were one of the youngest captains in the NHL with the Washington Capitals, I think, in the history of the NHL at that point. Uh, what was some of the qualities that you offered or had that made you suitable for that job at such an early age?
It's interesting. I wish I could have watched myself during that time, and I probably would have given you a better answer. I think what the Capitals saw was, and I say this humbly, was the sort of the values that the Caps wanted in their team were sort of, some values that I sort of felt were important too. So, I wasn't a tough guy, but if somebody went after one of my guys, I'm gonna support them. I'm gonna, we played tough teams, right? You think about the late 70s going into Philadelphia
Yeah.
or into Boston, or, those were tough games, and you had to show up. And I think not only just showing up, but having a competitive spirit to win was a value that the Caps were trying to really integrate into their team. I think the other thing that maybe they saw was I had been a leader in junior hockey, and I was a captain of our team there. So I had a little bit of background in leadership, certainly not at the NHL level. And I think that those two sort of qualities or characteristics are what the Caps saw. It was a learning curve, Adam. I wish I would have had a mentor, right? Somebody who had been there before, could have guided me a little bit. I made lots of mistakes, but it was a great experience. And I'm pretty good at mistakes. I mean, I think that's how. I don't know if it's how you learn, but I tend to learn best by messing up and then sort of figuring out the learning curve on that mess up and trying not to apply it again.
Yeah. Well, as an athlete, I assume the space between the room for failure isn't that much. I mean, you're not given too much of a leeway in terms of the pressure that's placed upon a professional athlete. But on a human experience, I think we have the opportunity to contemplate and not be as pressured as a professional person. Um, I know from my experience, I know probably a person who does find the spiritual path, that I guess the greatest adversities are the greatest, I guess, greatest teachers for us.
Yes.
And sometimes many people play the victim, and I don't know how that mindset plays out in professional sports. If what your experience has been with athletes who couldn't rebound from a bad game or from a bad experience, and if you saw that, did you see that, or were you able to impart your wisdom or your personal strength on those
Yeah.
situations?
Adam, that's a great question. And I think the world that, is struggling right now, and it's not just part of hockey, it's part of life in general, is when hard times happen and we do turn into victims, or at least we feel like, the world has done us wrong, or, it's not my fault, it's his fault. And what I found at the NHL level, at the highest, sort of as an athlete at the highest part of sport, is that didn't last long. If players that didn't take responsibility, that blamed others, or that felt, boy, I can't believe the coach didn't play me, right? They didn't last, right? They didn't
Right,
last long.
right,
And I feel for especially our younger generation, that, and I'm not trying to get political on either side, but when and you see a lot of victimhood right now throughout our world. It's crazy. You see billionaires that want to be victims, right?
that's right,
Like they
right.
they want people to feel bad for them, and it's just doesn't work. I mean, I don't. I'm sure you've had the same experience. In my experience, the minute that I try to point at someone else for something that I did wrong, I'm done.
Yeah,
And it just there's it you know it just doesn't allow us. Here's what I learned at a young age: if I could blame the referee for a loss,
right,
then I didn't have to get better,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely,
I didn't have to get better,
right,
so I never got better. But if I assume the responsibility for a loss or a bad play or whatever, and I said, okay, that I was wrong there and I need to work on that and I'm going to get better, that's how you grow in life, right? The other thing I've noticed recently from a leadership point of view is that a shame, there's an interesting word.
yes.
When shame goes wrong in people's lives, they become
I'm
narcissists.
just going to bring it up.
In other words, they blame other people,
Yes,
and they take no responsibility on their own. But
absolutely.
when shame goes right, like if I have something that's wrong in my life, and I feel shame or I feel blame or whatever, it is when I can take that and go, okay, I messed up and I'm going to get better. So I love your question around being a victim, because I've watched it all my life.
Well, I think the first place that a person who can see it outside the home is experiencing it in the home or around people we know. And I know for
Yes.
myself personally that I was exposed to that behavior. But from my perspective, understanding it a little bit differently, it's people who have a sensitivity towards other people's emotions, an empathic trait, that their ability to understand them is then taken advantage or twisted around. And so that brings me to the point where, as a Washington Capital and named the captain, and developing this connection to spirituality, and players who don't take ownership for their failures, having a person who has a Catholic background, a connection to spirituality, with a mindset of connecting to something, as you just mentioned, or at least, taking ownership, self-realization. Did that take place where they were threatened by your ability to go beyond the shame and go beyond the aspects that we just mentioned?
Yeah, maybe, Adam. I assume the responsibility for those relationships.
Right.
I may have messed up. I was, as a young Christian, I was pretty excited about my faith. Here's me. I mean, I'm on an airplane. I'm thinking, okay, if the airplane goes down, do I go up?
Yeah.
Can I actually have a friendship with the creator of the universe? That was my question. When I found that I could through Jesus, because of his crucifixion, because of his death and his shedding blood on my behalf, so that when a perfect God looks at an imperfect Ryan, he doesn't see an imperfect Ryan, he sees the blood of Jesus. That covering for me was such a powerful realization and truth. Jesus says that we worship God in spirit and in truth. And that truth really, really just impacted me. And here's what happened, Adam. I'm thinking, boy, everybody needs to know this. So I was actually very outgoing with my faith. And I'm not ashamed of that. That was something that was natural. But I think that, as you know, oftentimes that is not well received from certain people. And I think that did bring a little bit of maybe a disconnect. I would say this, though. The players that said that publicly to the paper and all of that were also players that were at the end of their career, and they were looking for an excuse.
Interesting. Yeah. As I look at it, in terms of the religious sense, I reflect a little bit personally, not to take over this conversation with something specific, but it relates to what you said about, for myself, after I went through a specific divorce and the loss of having a connection to my children, there was something interesting about finding Jesus on the cross, as opposed to being indoctrinated into some system of having to believe something that didn't come naturally. So in other words, I have friends who are athletes, and we talk about, I don't understand what your spiritual connection means. And I said, because in some cases they were turned off to looking up to people who went to church, but didn't follow, didn't act a certain way. They were church goers, but didn't follow the doctrine or the things behind it. And so I told them, for me, it's easy because I didn't really grow up in any type of religious feeling, and through my own feelings of desolate, I came to a place of seeing Jesus on a cross. I bought the book Sermon on the Mount, and for me, it was very fascinating for me to have that. And so, when you have a connection like you did, how did it impact your level of aggression? Did it impact your ability to look at things from a different perspective in terms of fighting in the NHL? Did you have to waver back and forth with your emotions of how you would react in a situation, even though you were a warrior?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of my favorite stories in the Bible, although it's fascinating and people wonder about it, is 1 Samuel 17 with David and Goliath, right? Like, there's a warrior, and Goliath's this huge fighter, a little bit like a goon in the NHL. You got some big guys, And you know, David is after a man after God's own heart. Like, the only difference between David and Goliath, other than size and strength, was the condition of their hearts, right? Goliath was 100% focused on his strength and on his ability to kill people. And David was 100% focused on God, and how that Goliath was ruining the reputation of the Israelites' God. And so he said, I don't care. I mean, go ahead and kill me, but you know, I'm not coming after you with a spear and a sword. He said, I'm coming after you with the power of the Lord Almighty. And I love that idea, that contrast, because I think, see, for me, it took a long time, Adam, to figure out as a Christian athlete, how can I be aggressive? How can I play hard? How, like, and it really hit me, you know, what was the difference between David and Goliath? Like, David's heart, he killed somebody, right? Like, he went to war.
Right,
So
right,
how
right.
can he be right to God when he goes to war? Well, there's only one way, and that is that his heart is right before God, right? He is honoring God in his heart, and that's the only way. And you know, it was true of me too. You'll laugh, Adam. Your listeners will watchers will look this up later, but look at Matthew 6:1. That's the hardest verse for a professional athlete.
Okay.
Because it says, if you receive applause from men and women, you will not receive applause from your Father in heaven. Think about what a professional athlete does.
Yeah, absolutely.
We play so that you clap, right? But there's only one way that I can be on in my Christian life, and that is I'm playing for God. My heart is His.
Interesting. Wow. Very interesting. As you speak about David, I think about Dave Schultz, um, and
Yep.
in terms of what, as you
There was a
mentioned before,
Goliath.
yeah, when you brought up the subject of the Boston Bruins and the Philadelphia Flyers. I mean, that was
Yep.
going in, that was literally going into the Coliseum. I assume. Was there a different mindset that it took to go to those buildings and playing those two teams as opposed to other specific teams? And what was the qualities that
Totally.
were, yeah.
Totally. And you know, you mentioned mindset. I love that. My wife Jenny and I have just developed a mindset model, a 6 mindset model that impacts everything. And that's our next book, Breakout. So we're not quite ready to sell it to people or to give it away, but it'll be out soon, and it'll really help people understand their thinking. But you know, when we went into Philadelphia, here's what I found is, if I was 100% fixated, or my teammates were 100% fixated on fear, because that's the big debilitator, right? And that's what the Flyers wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted to intimidate. Intimidation is when you can get the other team or the players to be focused on fear and not on faith,
That's interesting.
right? That's our big opportunity in life, is we're going to look through a lens of fear, or we're going to look through a lens of faith. The lens of faith says, we're going to win this game, right? We're moving in a direction. I'm going to play my best, and this is going to happen. A lens of fear is debilitating, and it holds us back. And we had guys, Adam, we had big defensemen, bless his heart. I won't say his name, but you know, going into Philadelphia, he'd puke before the game. Like, he was so afraid, right, of what he thought was coming. And you know what was interesting? Intimidation is fascinating, because even if they don't do it, it works.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Right?
true.
It's not about brawling. Like, the first game in Philadelphia, we had a bench clearing brawl. Every other game we went into Philadelphia, what do you think our players were thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it didn't often happen. So even when it didn't happen, they had taken our minds off the game and had fixated our minds through the lens of fear. And so they won games, you know, that were easy to win because we didn't show up the way we should have. So my mindset, and I know many other players on my team had that mindset, was, okay, bring it on,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Bring it on. Like, if you want to brawl, we're good. I might go away with a black eye, no problem. I've had black eyes before, right? And I'm not going to allow other people to intimidate my best game.
Yeah, it's amazing. Interesting, because it takes that trust within it. I think you said a little bit. I think you said it best. It required to maintain a positive outlook despite the situation and go higher to a different place. But I could see your personality and your mindset being an influence over the team, or having at least the mindset that you would stand up tall and be a gladiator in that forum itself. So that's admirable. That's inspiring. In most sports, I remember as a teenager growing up, I remember football. I remember football teams, or at least joining together in the locker room in some type of like spiritual sense, where they would gather together and the coach would give a speech.
Yep.
Uh, and why was hockey? What was different about hockey than the other team sports? Not that I know baseball or basketball, but I remember football.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hockey was late to, I would say, formal Christianity. For example, right now across the NHL, across the AHL, and across junior hockey, Hockey Ministries International has done a wonderful job of just in a very gentle way introducing teams to a chaplain. So most teams now have chaplains. Like in football, basketball, baseball, the Bible Belt throughout the U.S.
Right.
sort of
Oh, that's yeah.
introduced that sport much, much sooner. So hockey being primarily from Canada, northern U.S., coming now down into the southern U.S., for whatever reason, had less of that influence. So when I was in the NHL, when I was just starting in Washington, we were just starting to have chapels as a team, which was, a guy would meet us in New York in a hotel room, and he would tell his Christian story and encourage us. But that didn't happen in the early days very much. Now it's much more accepted, Adam, and I think that's why you see such a growth a growth in Christianity throughout the game of hockey.
Right. All right, going a little bit to your hockey career, shifting a little bit towards the highlight, I would say. I was it the Stanley Cup victory? Um,
I think so.
yeah, and what was it like being in Montreal, specifically with the history?
Lots of pressure. You'll love this. When Rick Green and I were traded from the Capitals to the Montreal Canadiens, uh, four Montreal Canadiens went the other way: Ingblom, Jarvis, Lachlan, and Rod Langway. And the headline in the Montreal Gazette when Rick and I landed was "Worst trade in NHL history."
Wow, wow.
Right? Like that's what we flew into. And I learned. I think that this is where Breakout, our book, is coming from, Adam. Is I learned such valuable lessons through messing up, right? Like that headline impacted me and probably influenced my game negatively for at least the first month of my time there. I was trying to live somebody else's headline for my life. I was trying to rebuke it. And instead of just playing the game that I knew how to play, the year before I had 38 goals in the NHL. I knew how to play this game, right? But a headline took my eyes off my game. So I think that there was huge lessons learned in Montreal. If you don't figure out how to play under pressure, you're gone,
Right.
right? And we had many players traded in, very good players, and traded out because they couldn't handle the pressure or didn't want to handle the pressure. There's a lot of NHL players that want to play, in Florida or in, places that are easy to play because people don't know the game and there's no pressure. There's lots of NHL players that want that. I sort of grew to like that pressure, and I learned from the players on the team that this was the best place to play. Like if you're going to spend your career, we never, there wasn't one season that we missed the playoffs, and we were always going long into the playoffs. And 2 out of the 9 seasons that we played there, we reached a cup final, winning one in '86, losing one in '89. So it was a wonderful learning experience. I think especially, Adam, because coming out of that, I'm very curious about leadership and about high performance and about team.
Right.
Right. So I learned some great lessons that I can pass on to leaders across corporate North America.
Yeah. I remember watching games in the Forum. I was a Ranger fan. I am a Ranger fan. Watching them go into the Forum itself and seeing, the crowd itself well behaved or at least manicured, so to speak, well
Yes.
dressed,
Yes.
right behind the bench. But the intensity that existed was a little bit probably it didn't reveal the true emotions and probably how high tempered people can get after a loss. So I can imagine that. In 1989, you guys went to the Cup Finals and you scored an overtime goal against the Calgary Flames. Was that a
Yeah.
disappointment? Was that one of the disappointments of your career?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that goal, I was so thankful that I didn't care who scored the goal, but that was game 3, and we win in double overtime. And so we go up 2-1. I always think in a best of 7 series, this is just my experience, that game 4 is always the most critical game, because if you win game 4, if you're up 2-1 and you win game 4, you're going to go up 3-1 and you're going to go on to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, there's not many teams that come back from a 3-1 deficit. What happened to us is, I don't know if it was our foot that came off the pedal or if Calgary just got angry and their foot went down. But either way, biggest disappointment of my NHL career was game 4 in Montreal, because they won.
Right.
Now we're tied 2-2. Then they win game 5 and they win game 6 and they win a Stanley Cup in Montreal.
Yeah. At the Forum, yeah, that was a disappointment. Shifting towards leadership. Shifting towards leadership. Uh, who was the greatest leader that you saw before you either became a captain or you decided to go into your leadership program that you implement?
Yeah. A great question. There's so many different types of leaders that I enjoyed. I mean, Mike Gartner in Washington, in his own way, was a spectacular player and an amazing leader. Like, he had a confidence about him, and he had a way that worked for him, and people could follow that. I really enjoyed, guys like Larry Robinson with the Canadians. Larry was he was a fun-loving leader. Like, he kept everything loose, and he was always smiling, always laughing. I loved Guy Lafleur. He was my roommate for a while, and he was a quiet leader, but he taught all of us young guys how to be a pro. You see, at the NHL level, I don't know if this is true in your life, Adam. I think it is, and people's lives that are listening, is we have 2 choices in life. We can come to work or we can come to win. That's it. Right. And coming to win is at a different echelon, right? It's a different mindset. It's a
Yeah.
different process. It's coming to win is not being a victim, right? Coming to work is, oh, I have to go to work again. And coming to win is so different. And I think that Guy Lafleur was, I watched him. He was on the ice 40 minutes before any other player for every practice,
Right.
right? He came to win. He put the time in, but he didn't have to be there. He loved to be there. He couldn't wait to be there. I think the one formal leader that was very impactful for me was Bob Gainey. And Bob was the captain of our team.
Right.
And Bob had great timing as a leader. So I don't know, if you've experienced this, Adam, but mature leadership figures out the timing of the team. For example, in February of 1989, we were struggling. We went through a very difficult time, and Bob didn't jump right in. Most of us leaders want to create solutions right away. But with people, if people aren't ready to change, sometimes leaders have to wait. And Bob waited until we were really bad. And finally, we got to a place where we all said, okay, we better make some changes here or
Right.
we're going to be in trouble. So I love that. I've learned so many lessons from so many different styles of leaders. And I don't think there's one way. There's not that you can't point to five things and say this is
Right,
how
right.
you lead. We're all so different, and the cultures we lead are different too.
Yeah, but one of the qualities that I've noticed uh, is a leader from my perspective as a teacher, and I had administration, I had principals. When people were looking for power as opposed to uniting people, and
Yeah.
sometimes people become selfish in their quest to get somewhere, and they're not thinking about the team; they're thinking about themselves. Have you come across that?
That's a good point. Oh yeah, all the time. And that's where narcissism comes in too,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
people people they're more important in their own mind than they are in other people's minds. It's interesting. I just read an interesting book that called that enemy mode. So people get into enemy mode and all they want to do is win, and it's all about them versus relational mode, which is about the relationship. It's about people, right? You know what people don't understand at the NHL level? If you're not in the dressing room, people would not know this. I had a guy say to me the other day, you can't be an NHL player and be a Christian. So that was fun. I said, okay, that's interesting.
wow,
He said, because you're 100% fixated on winning all the time. You have to win. And I looked at him. I said, "Well, some NHL teams are there, but here's what I've experienced. If coaches focus on increasing, developing, and strengthening the culture and the players on the team, those teams win.
wow,
It's not about outcomes.
yeah,
You
right,
don't
right,
focus on outcomes and say, in your life, my life, well, I have to win or else." That's fear based.
right,
See, there's only two. Apparently, our brains are fueled by two things. Number one, fear. And you and I've experienced that, right? And we're
absolutely,
still experiencing. There's things in our lives that click that fear, in our brain. The number two things that our brains are fueled by, the second thing is joy, relational joy, right? The connection with people. Our brains are so fixated on attachment with people that when we don't have strong attachment, we don't think well
right,
and
right.
we don't live well. So I think that this idea of leadership, boy, it is complex, it
Yeah,
is fascinating, and I think that's why I'm so curious, Adam, about leadership, because once you start learning in this area, it's a lifetime of learning.
a balance between compassion and strength as an individual, and being compassion to one's own personal suffering and one's own weaknesses, I think is then corresponds to understanding other people's journey, and then that human connection of understanding is leadership and strength. And I think
Yes.
from your perspective, I'm sure you've been around or you've seen teams that have wonderful superstars that can't gel together, and there are teams that may
Yeah.
have a few stars and do much better. Have you seen that? Have you understood that? Have you dissected that
Yeah,
theory?
for sure. For sure, for sure. I mean, and you earlier in the in our time together, you said ego, and that's true. I mean, people always say to me, you have to remove the ego from players and teams. And the way I look at it now, I sort of say, well, I don't want to disagree, but I disagree. The ego doesn't go away. The ego on great teams, the egos on the team get focused on the mission and the vision and the values of the team versus their individual selfishness, right? So that's the focus. And that's the great job of coaching is to bring all the egos, all the players together and get them focused on a journey and on a fun win, like on a fun movement versus imploding because they're all fighting against each other. And so yeah, totally, I've seen that. And I've seen years where we've been very talented and really not brought it together, and not won. I'll give you a quick little, just for your viewers. a very simple, and this is not mine, this is Jim Wilder's, who writes these books, but a little piece on just thinking about how to impact people relationally. And it's called CAKE. So it's easy to remember. The C is for curiosity. And I just think it's one of the great leadership qualities and the great leadership characteristics in 2024. How do we increase our curiosity in people, in process, right? In everything we do in our life? Can we stay curious? Because if we stay curious, we sort of move out of this place of judgment, right? It's not about, oh, you're wrong. No, it's tell me about your journey, because I'm understanding it in a different way. The C is curiosity. The A is appreciation. When we're looking at people and we appreciate who they are and things they do and what they say, it's really hard to be angry with people. So your relationships are much more fluid. The K is easy. It's kindness, right? If we can look to help others, it's really, it helps our ego to move in that right direction. And the E, Adam, is interesting. It's eye contact.
Wow.
So this is a little bit of a diagnostic on how your relationships are going, or even how other people's relationships are. Are they curious? Do they, talk about appreciation or make that happen? Do you see kindness in the way they live their life? And it's interesting in eye contact. When people don't, when they don't want to have eye contact, there's often interesting reasons. And so it is an indicator. So CAKE is a bit of a simple way to think about getting back into relational mode out of what Jim Wilder would call enemy mode.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. I get the idea behind that. I was gonna ask you in terms of the NHL itself, the players now, in terms of being exposed more to social media, to being exposed in the limelight. Has it shifted the mindset of the work ethic? Has it shifted the way hockey is headed? Or because once things get more into the light itself, more things become exposed and more people seek more attention. It seemed to me hockey was a little bit more on the back burner as it related to its popularity in the United States. It's for one thing. And I guess the work ethic was something that was necessary to maintain or keep the cohesiveness of a league and of a quality. Uh, the players appear to be maybe more talented in terms of speed, uh, as opposed to other qualities. I don't know. Has the game changed? Let's put it that way. In terms of the work ethic, has it diminished? Has it maintained?
Yeah, great question. No, I think these kids are amazing that play now,
I know.
and they're faster than we were, and they're better conditioned than we were. Like they're amazing. I think the game has changed, but it's more about the way the game's played and the rules. I think we've moved away from, a lot of intimidation and fighting and stuff like that. That used to be a big part of the game. Now it's a small part of the game.
Yeah.
Speed is the game now, and so the first thing, that scouts are looking at is speed and skating, is talent. I think you still think you have to be tough. Instead of punching a player in the head, you have to be tough on the puck. Right now the toughness is getting the puck and keeping the puck, because players are strong and they can get you off the puck. But here's what I think when you ask me that question. So from a social media point of view, that is not so much dependent on the talent of the player. That's more dependent on the character of the player.
Right. Right.
And so if a player back when I played had an ego that said, this is all about me, and boy, look at me, I'm great, and look at how many tweets I've got, and look at
Right. Right.
this.
Right.
That was going to happen in my day, and it's going to happen today. It's going to happen if you're a lawyer. It's going to happen if you're a doctor. It's going to happen, right, if you're going to school. So I think it's much more around the character of the person than it is about the talent of the player.
Yeah. There were very few players in the NA, not very few. The European player had more of a mobility, a certain type of movement that was different. And I think you had the way you skated from watching you play, the way you skated, you had that type of agility, that movement, and that kind of finesse where you were a tough type of player as well as an agile on your feet. It appeared to me the speed that you had. I remember Mike Gartner on the right shooting a slap shot and from going over the line and taking a slap shot and scoring over the shoulder of the goalie.
That's what I remember too.
Yeah. So that
He
was
was amazing.
And when I look at now and I see players like yourself, a person like yourself, would you be able to play in the league today, not based upon skill level, not based upon that, but based upon the mindset of the player? Are they more evolved
Yeah.
to it?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think the mindset that gave Mike and myself and others success at the NHL level at the time would also work today. I mean, that's what it. There's an element of competition. There's an element of compete, right? Like when the puck goes into the corner and the 6'4" defenseman goes in, and a 5'8" forward goes in, and the 5'8" forward comes out with the puck. that is the element that is the differentiator between great players and good players, and between good players and journeyman players.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be able to compete. And what I love about life is that this is not hockey. This is life. My wife Jenny and I run our little leadership development business, and if I don't want to get up at 5 a.m, we don't make any capital, so we don't pay any bills.
Right.
Right? Like it's who wants it most, right? And can you turn your, I've got to go to work into I can't wait to win, right? That's really the gap that I see in the character of people that play in the NHL, or that play in Best Buy.
When you mention the word win, uh, does winning could mean stepping over somebody, or winning could be uniting together for a cause? So how do you define winning?
Do you know my favorite definition of winning? And it's different in different contexts.
Right.
If I'm playing a team, then obviously we got something to win.
Right.
Do you know what my favorite definition is now? Is beating my yesterday.
Wow, that's excellent. That's excellent.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like you, Adam. I want to grow.
Right.
I want to be better. My wife Jen and I love this industry. Last year I had to count them up. Last year I read 44 books.
Wow.
So why am I at 65 reading books and traveling? We haven't been home in a month, right? We're just all over the place doing, not only leadership development, but ministry, throughout North America. Why are we doing that? Well, because we're curious and we're excited, and we want to grow and we want to learn, and we don't want to stagnate. Why would we live life, right, going backwards? We want to move forward.
Yeah. Most people, like you mentioned, I just want to go back earlier. You said on that flight with John Pronovo, in terms of handing you the Testament or the Bible. It's interesting because once you accept death and know that we're eternal, then the
Yeah,
fear to live is more fruitful, knowing that you don't have to be fearful of death. Your life continues.
beautiful.
And I think from me listening to your inspiration, that appears to be the motto of remaining a child and continuing to grow and learn as you go on this path. And for myself, it's very difficult when you're not involved in a team aspect or a group of people uh, to be
Yep.
able to share that feeling or that understanding that exists. But I think it's a personal journey, and it's a personal conversation with oneself that is the inspiration to continue and go forward. And through your perspective and listening to you, it's inspiring to hear that, because that's the energy that I get from you. Uh, Maybe you could share a little bit about your leadership program that you do with your wife Jen.
Thank you, Adam. And I'll just move back because I think what you said is really important. we don't live our Christian life in a vacuum. Certainly we have a relationship with God and with Jesus and the Holy Spirit and God the Father, but we also are told, right, that this is don't live on your own down here on earth. That's what the church is about. It's about getting our people together so that we can, one of the key elements to growth is to see other people ahead of us. I mean, I am challenged daily to read the scriptures and to learn them and to understand it better and to know what Jesus wants of me, right? I'm challenged daily to do that. And part of that challenge is that people are ahead of me in this journey. And I want to catch up to them. I want to be like them. I want to have character like them as they follow Jesus. So I think you're right. I think this is not a superstar career where we just do it on our own. This is about us doing it together with people. But our leadership development company is called Heads Up and Heads Up Communication. And I used to have to get my head up or I'd be in trouble. And we're so thrilled. We're in a place, we're probably doing this for the last 25 years. And we're in a place now where across North America, we're working with some Fortune 500 companies. We're working with medium-sized, smaller companies. Really doesn't matter. We do leadership development for 8 and 10 people. Can be maybe even an executive team. We just finished 120 people. They brought all of their people across, from all over the world, all their leaders and salespeople into a conference, and we had them. We do a lot of long-term leadership development now. So full day sessions every month, every quarter for 6 or 8 quarters. So we started off doing keynotes, and I love keynotes, and I like doing them. But what we found was the keynote is great to inspire people for a short amount of time, but leadership development is really about having impact across time, right? It's helping people change. And I think if we're going to do that, it's inspiration's powerful, information's important, but really the word that we have to focus on is transformation. And this is what Jesus does so well in our lives, right? He doesn't just give us information and say, be left brain out, analyze that information. No, he's looking for transformation. He wants us to change. And I think that's the goal of our leadership development processes.
Yeah, I guess I guess when the student is ready, then the teacher appears. And in terms of your qualities that you've experienced in your life as an athlete, as a Christian, and as an inspirational speaker and leader, and the qualities of leadership, it's easy for a person to then move forward and proceed to find their own path. If you could leave the audience with an inspirational message based on your sports, your athletic career, or through your life's journey, maybe you can do that.
Yeah, I'd love to leave a thought. I mean, I give recent research has really pushed some of this, and I'd mentioned Jim Wilder and his work. And I'd leave a thought around just this idea of relational joy. When I have been the best athlete possible, when I've been at the top of my game in the NHL, it's never been where you had to grunt it out, right? Like, oh, here we go. Now I got to work hard. It's always been, as I look back, I've had relational joy, right? I've enjoyed the process. I've enjoyed the people, right? You've got this smile on your face. Like, people play their best game with a big smile. I think most fans don't get that. Most fans think, oh, you make, the players now make $10 million. You should work twice as hard, right? But it doesn't work that way. I always say to people, take a tennis racket, squeeze it as hard as you can, and try hit the ball. That's Nothing true. Good happens when you're full of fear. And I think that would be my one thought that I want to end, just saying to people is certainly from a faith point of view, joy is a fruit of the Spirit, right? So love, joy, you walk down the fruit of the Spirit. It's beautiful. And joy is an emotion for sure. But joy is also relational, right? When we have a relationship with Christ, we can be angry, we can be struggling, we can be in the hardest part of our life and still have joy in the relationship that we have with Jesus or with each other. So that's something that I think in 2024 that we want to have more of.
So your word is almost surrender as well, a surrendering.
Love that word.
Yeah, that sounds
More of
like
him, less of me.
yeah, I get that. That's the message I get: to surrender, to let go of the racket, to let go of the hockey stick, not the hockey stick, but to let go of the baseball bat when you're holding
Good.
it, and to surrender. That's yeah, it's palpable and inspirational at the same time. So I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. And if anybody would like to reach out to you, is there a place that they can do that?
Beautiful. Thanks, Adam. RyanWalter.com. It's
Okay.
real simple, RyanWalter.com. And you can, connect directly with me there, or just Ryan at RyanWalter.com.
Okay. Ryan, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity again, and I want to thank you.
Thank you, Adam.